There's a piece of ice currently drifting out of our solar system, heading back into the dark it came from, that started forming before our sun existed, not before Earth, before the sun itself ignited, before there was a solar system for Earth to even be part of. That is not speculation, and it is not the premise of a science fiction film. It is the conclusion of a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Nature on June 22, 2026, built from data collected by the James Webb Space Telescope as it watched an interstellar comet called 3I Atlas begin its long journey away from the sun. The astronomers involved describe finding chemical ratios inside this object that simply do not exist in any comet ever measured from our own solar system. Evidence that this specific chunk of ice has been drifting through interstellar space, alone, in absolute cold and darkness, for somewhere between 10 and 12 billion years. Our entire solar system is 4.5 billion years old. This is the real story of what James Webb actually found when it turned its instruments toward 3I Atlas as it left our solar system behind, and why the honest science here is stranger and more genuinely worth your attention than any manufactured conspiracy could ever be. I'm your host, and this is your channel. If you want the real science behind the biggest discoveries in space, subscribe now, because we're just getting started. To understand why this specific object captured this level of scientific attention, you first have to understand exactly how rare it is. 3I, or Atlas, is only the third interstellar object ever confirmed passing through our solar system in the entire history of human astronomy. The first, Oumuamua, was spotted in 2017, a strange, elongated object that tumbled through our system and vanished before scientists could gather much data on it at all. The second, Borisov, arrived in 2019, a more conventionally comet-like object that gave researchers a somewhat better look. Then, on July the 1st, 2025, a network of automated telescopes in Chile, part of a NASA-funded early warning system called ATLAS, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, spotted a fast-moving point of light on a trajectory that made no sense for anything native to our solar system. When astronomers traced its path backward, it led out into interstellar space entirely, marking only the third confirmed interstellar visitor human instruments have ever detected. It was given the designation 3I Atlas, the number 3 for the third interstellar object confirmed, the letter I for interstellar, and Atlas for the network that spotted it. The moment its interstellar origin was confirmed, an extraordinary coordinated observation campaign kicked into motion. Hubble, the James Webb Space Telescope, the newer Sphere-X Observatory, NASA's TESS mission, originally built to hunt for exoplanets, even the European Space Agency's JUICE spacecraft, on its way to study Jupiter's icy moons, and NASA's Psyche and Lucy missions, both headed toward asteroids elsewhere in the solar system, all turned their instruments toward this single object as it passed through our neighborhood. It's genuinely rare for this many different spacecraft, run by different agencies, pursuing entirely different primary missions, to coordinate observations of a single object on this kind of timeline, and it tells you how seriously the scientific community treated this specific opportunity. 3I Atlas made its closest approach to the Sun, called perihelion, on October 29, 2025, passing at a distance of about 130 million miles, just inside the orbit of Mars, close enough that astronomers had genuine uncertainty about whether the comet would survive the encounter intact at all. It did. And as it emerged from behind the Sun in December 2025, freshly warmed, actively venting gas and ice into space in a way that gave instruments a far clearer signal to study than they'd had before perihelion, astronomers turned Webb toward it once more, specifically to capture its chemical fingerprint as it began the long journey back out into interstellar space. What Webb found in that December 2025 observation, later confirmed and expanded through additional data collected into early 2026, genuinely surprised the research team. Comets native to our own solar system, formed from the same original disk of material that built the Sun and all 8 planets, tend to share broadly similar chemical signatures, variations on a common theme, because they all form from the same basic raw ingredients under roughly comparable conditions. When Webb's instruments measured the specific ratios of carbon and heavy hydrogen, a naturally occurring, heavier variant of ordinary hydrogen, inside 3I Atlas, the numbers didn't match anything researchers had ever recorded in a solar system comet. Not a close match with a plausible explanation. A genuinely different chemical signature, one that pointed toward an entirely different formation environment altogether. Working backward from those specific chemical ratios, using well-established models of how these particular isotopes accumulate in ice over time under different conditions, the research team arrived at their central, genuinely startling conclusion. 3IR Atlas appears to have originally formed somewhere between 10 and 12 billion years ago. Our own solar system, by comparison, is approximately 4.5 billion years old. This single object, currently visible through backyard telescopes as it heads back out into the dark, began forming as ice grains around some other long-vanished star system nearly 3 times before our own sun ever ignited. It has spent the overwhelming majority of the history of the universe drifting alone through the cold, near-total vacuum of interstellar space, occasionally, perhaps, passing near other stars over unimaginable stretches of time, before finally wandering close enough to our own solar system for automated telescopes in Chile to notice it. It's worth taking a moment to sit with what that actually means, because the number itself is almost difficult to process. The universe itself is currently estimated to be about 13.8 billion years old. An object that began forming 10 to 12 billion years ago formed when the universe was still relatively young, when the first generations of stars were still actively seeding the cosmos with the heavier elements needed to eventually build rocky planets, comets, and eventually life. 3I Atlas is, in a very real sense, a physical fossil from an era of the universe that existed long before the raw material that would eventually become Earth, the Sun, or any of us had even come together yet. This isn't the only genuinely strange thing Webb and other telescopes have found while studying this object. Earlier observations, taken by Webb's near-infrared spectrograph in August 2025 before perihelion, revealed that the comet's outgassing was overwhelmingly dominated by carbon dioxide, an unusually high ratio compared to water, the volatile that typically dominates comet activity in our own solar system. Then, in the December 2025 post-perihelion observations, Webb's mid-infrared instrument detected something that had never been recorded in any interstellar object before: methane, a genuinely volatile ice that should sublimate, turning directly from solid to gas at very low temperatures. If methane had been sitting anywhere near the comet's surface as it approached the sun, it should have started venting into space almost immediately upon warming. It didn't. The methane signature only appeared in the post-perihelion data, meaning it had been buried, sealed beneath the comet's outer layers, protected from solar heat until enough warmth had finally worked its way down into deeper layers to release it. Some researchers studying this data, including Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, have also documented a measurable opposition surge, a roughly 20% spike in brightness that occurred specifically when the Sun, Earth, and 3I Atlas aligned on January 22nd, 2026, a real statistically significant optical phenomenon tied to how sunlight scatters off the specific arrangement of dust particles in the comet's surrounding coma. Now, it's important to directly address something that's clearly part of what draws people to stories about this particular object, because pretending it doesn't exist would be dishonest, and addressing it honestly is far more interesting than either ignoring it or indulging it. Since 3I Atlas was first confirmed, a wave of online speculation, some of it from serious scientists asking legitimate, if provocative, questions, and much more of it from less credible corners of the internet, has floated the idea that an object this large, this old, and this chemically strange might not be entirely natural. Avi. Loeb himself has built part of his career on publicly raising exactly these kinds of uncomfortable questions about interstellar visitors, and it's a fair question to formally ask in a research paper. But here is what the actual, gathered evidence says, drawn from Hubble, from Webb, from SphereX, from half a dozen spacecraft across the solar system, and from ground-based observatories around the world. Every single physical signature 3I Atlas has produced. Its coma, its tail, its outgassing pattern, its dust production, its buried and gradually released methane, its measurable opposition surge, matches the behavior of a natural comet. Not a spacecraft, not a probe. A comet, an extraordinarily old one, chemically distinct from anything native to our solar system, but a comet nonetheless. NASA's own public assessment of the accumulated data states plainly that there are no signs of artificial technology. Nikki Fox, the Associate Administrator of NASA's Science Mission Directorate, stated directly at a public briefing that 3I Atlas poses no threat whatsoever to Earth, and the comet's own trajectory confirms it, passing no closer than roughly 170 million miles from our planet at its nearest approach in December 2025. The genuinely fascinating part of this story isn't a manufactured threat. It's the honest scientific implication of an object this old actually existing and actually being available for us to study directly, even briefly, for the first time in human history. A team led by researchers including Loeb and Mauro Barbieri has estimated, based on how frequently objects like 3I Atlas are actually being detected relative to how large our search capabilities currently are, that there is likely at least one similarly sized interstellar object present within a distance of about 4.5 times the Earth-Sun distance at any given moment, drifting somewhere through our solar neighborhood. That estimate is almost certainly conservative, since inactive interstellar objects, ones not actively venting visible gas and dust, would be dramatically harder to detect with current instruments. It strongly suggests that comparably ancient, comparably strange interstellar wanderers have likely passed through our solar system before, undetected, in the era before wide-field digital sky surveys existed to catch them, and that more are almost certainly out there right now, simply waiting for the right telescope at the right moment to notice. 3i Atlas itself is not coming back. Its trajectory carries it on a one-way path out of our solar system entirely, projected to reach the inner edge of the Oort cloud by around the year 2189, to finally pass beyond the outer limit of our sun's gravitational influence entirely in roughly 8,000 years. As it moves further away, it grows dimmer, colder, and increasingly difficult to study, and the window scientists have to keep gathering data on this specific object is closing permanently. This was, and is, essentially our only real opportunity to closely examine physical material that predates our own solar system by nearly 3 times, drifting past us for the first and only time in the entire span of human civilization. So here is where this genuinely leaves things, honestly, grounded entirely in peer-reviewed research and NASA's own public statements. A piece of ancient interstellar ice, formed somewhere between 10 and 12 billion years ago, long before our sun existed, passed through our solar system in 2025 and 2026, and an unprecedented, coordinated fleet of spacecraft turned their instruments toward it to learn everything they could before it disappeared back into the dark permanently. What they found was strange, genuinely strange. Chemistry that doesn't match anything native to our own solar system, buried methane released only after the comet's closest approach to the sun, and an age that stretches back to an era of the universe almost incomprehensibly distant from our own. What they did not find, despite months of intense coordinated scrutiny from nearly every major space agency on Earth, was any evidence whatsoever of anything artificial. The real story here was never a threat. It was a fossil, older than our own star, passing silently through our solar system, and for a few short months, we actually got to look at it directly. If this kind of story is what you come here for, one grounded in exactly what NASA and its research partners actually measured and said, rather than exaggeration, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's clearly more ancient interstellar material passing through our neighborhood than we ever previously realized. Drop a comment telling me whether you think we'll detect another object this old again in our lifetimes, and share this with someone who still thinks the only interesting stories in space involve something artificial.